Of course, there have been very substantial policy responses to increasing signs of a domestic recession. The first is that the Reserve Bank has cut interest rates faster than it ever cut them before. This shows a long history of the Reserve Bank's cash rate, and they've cut interest rates from September last year by 4.25%, with not all of that flowing through to interest rates paid by mortgage holders and businesses, but a large proportion of it having flowed through. And the federal government, through a series of packages dating back to the economic security strategy last October, but there have been a series of them, has been engaged in very substantial fiscal stimulus, direct fiscal stimulus, which has been in the early parts of the period dominated by transfers. So that has been the first time owners boost, increased cash payments to first-time owners, and also the two transfers to one-off cash payments to individuals last December and this April, with the aim of supporting consumption. And then a series of infrastructure packages which are designed to, again, support the domestic economy. Normally, governments do not go in for such substantial fiscal stimulus, but these are not normal times, and with a coordinated downturn in the whole world, fiscal policy has a comparative advantage over monetary policy, because spillovers from one economy to another, which are normally regarded as a disadvantage of expansionary fiscal policy, are a benefit, because to the extent that every country is doing fiscal expansion, the extent to which some of your fiscal expansion spills over into other economies is a benefit, because it helps them and they help you, and that's all good. So fiscal policy is more suited to a situation of a coordinated global downturn than relative to monetary policy, compared to a downturn in a single country. We have in the budget put in some estimates of what we think the effect of the fiscal stimulus is, and the fiscal stimulus is substantial, and we think it will have a substantial impact on the economy. Without the fiscal stimulus, we estimate that the downturn would have been comparable in depth to the early 80s recession, and we estimate that unemployment would have peaked at around 10%. So we think that the fiscal stimulus does make a significant difference to economic outcomes, but it does come, but a consequence of the fiscal stimulus is that you do run significant fiscal deficits for some period of time. This shows you on the bottom panel the preferred measure of the federal government's fiscal position as a percent of GDP. Recessions always bring deficits. One of the things we learnt from the Great Depression is that is a economic phenomenon that should not be resisted. Attempts to resist the economy, the budget going into deficit in the Great Depression were one of the reasons the Great Depression is called the Great Depression. Of course, the reason that the Australian government has gone into deficit is both the very substantial reduction in tax revenue that's being projected over the period, but also the explicit fiscal stimulus that has been applied. Two more charts. One shows that Australia is in, so let me just explain the chart before I talk about it. This shows the stock of government debt, the total amount of government debt out that is owed by governments of different countries, and what it's projected to be over the next, out to 2014. And these are usually official estimates of these various countries. S&P, one of the credit rating agencies, has put the UK on negative watch for its credit rating because it, Standard & Poor's, thinks that UK debt may well reach 100% of GDP by 2014, which is not the end of the world, but is a reasonably big deal. Now, Australia entered the global financial downturn with an extremely strong federal balance sheet, which is a consequence of the large surpluses that had been run for the previous decade or so. And so we entered the global recession with in fact, slightly less than zero net debt. And so even though we are running sizable fiscal deficits over the next few years, we are projected to still have a very low level of debt by comparison with other countries. Okay, one final chart. And this is sort of stepping back some way, and it's kind of an interesting comparison between us and the US and the UK. The US and the UK have both been consuming a rising share of their output over the past 20 years. So in a sense, what can you do with domestic output? Well, you can consume it or you can invest it, is a way of thinking. And investing is kind of building for the future, and consuming is, well, consuming. And interestingly, both the US and the UK have been consuming a rising share of their output. And to some extent, that's been on the back of believing that the good times would last. And for both the US and the UK, that has turned out not to be true. And interestingly, Australia looks very different. I'm about to show you what the Australian chart looks like. And Australia looks different for two big reasons. One is that we've run very conservative fiscal policy over the last 20 years, namely that we have basically usually run surpluses. And the other reason is because we have a private private compulsory savings scheme, superannuation scheme, which tends to raise private saving and reduce domestic consumption. So we look very different on this chart, and particularly over the last few years, when GDP grew as strongly as it did because of the mining boom, we did not by and large consume that. We by and large invested it. So my take on this is that whereas it may well be an appropriate thing to say about the US and the UK that they have been over-consuming their future, or at least borrowing from their future, in a real sense that has not been the case for Australia. Okay, thanks very much.